If you look at the back of any given classroom, you will usually find a student staring at the ceiling fan. To the teachers pacing the front of the room, that stillness looks like laziness. They assume the child has disconnected. For a young boy named Vinit, that perceived laziness carried severe penalties. It meant routine trips to the principal's office. It meant public corrections. And worst of all, it meant exam results covered in red ink, pinned to the public board for everyone to see. The problem wasn't a lack of effort. The architecture of his school required a very specific set of tools. You listen to the lecture, you memorize the textbook, and you recite the answers. But Vinit's brain rejected recitation. He required complete physical immersion to grasp a subject. If he couldn't feel it, he couldn't retain it. Because none of the adults in his life possessed the language to describe his learning style, they applied the only label they had: failure. And sitting at that back bench, accumulating scoldings, Vinit accepted their diagnosis. He believed he was entirely broken. His mother, a professor herself, refused to accept that conclusion. Whenever the system failed her son, she pulled him out. She constantly moved him to new schools, hoping to find a teacher who would recognize why he wasn't responding to the standard curriculum. The depth of her desperation peaked when Vinit was in the 4th grade. Handed yet another failing report card, she picked up a razor blade and physically cut the word fail entirely out of the paper, trying to overwrite a system she couldn't control. By the 10th grade, Vinit was repeating the year. The social cost of being held back is immense, but one day he gathered every ounce of courage he had. He walked over and sat down right next to a highly studious classmate. He wanted to learn. He wanted to be accepted. The other boy looked at him, said absolutely nothing, packed up his books, and moved to another seat in disgust. Vinit didn't cause a scene. He hid his face from the teacher at the front and cried silently, watching his tears soaking into the lined paper of his notebook. That specific moment of total isolation stayed with him, fueling a lifelong obsession with dismantling the system that ignored him. Out of options, his mother made a radical pivot. For the 11th and 12th grades, she pulled Vinit out of the traditional school system entirely. He was left at home, completely alone, to study by himself. Alone at home, Vinit stopped fighting the curriculum and started exploring the science itself. He began cross-referencing different textbooks for the same topic, reading every single word until he could mentally visualize the physics. He wasn't just studying an electron anymore. He was imagining the movement of the field until he felt like he was part of it. A private tutor began visiting the house. When Vinit asked bizarre, upside-down questions, like visualizing kinetic energy by blowing air at a piece of paper until it burned, this tutor didn't dismiss him. He answered the question seriously. The results were immediate. Vinit scored a 99 in chemistry and a 78 in physics. Meanwhile, the peers who had thrived on rote memorization back in the traditional 10th grade classroom saw their marks plummet in higher-level sciences. The contrast was undeniable. The same student who was failing in the classroom was now outperforming his peers from his own bedroom. The failure was never in Vinit's mind. It was in the room he had left behind. Fast forward a few years. Vinit is 23 years old and holding an electrical engineering degree he has absolutely no interest in. His family expects him to take a stable corporate job, but he is desperate to study education instead. In a leap of faith, he opened his laptop and drafted a blind email to H.C. Verma, a legendary figure in Indian physics. Vinit poured out his childhood trauma, his isolation, and his burning desire to fix the educational system. He hit send, expecting silence. Within the hour, Verma replied. He validated Vinit's entire direction. He saluted his mother's resilience for pulling him out of the system, and he predicted that Vinit would one day create what he called game-changing models of education. Verma's response provided the forming validation Vinit needed to ignore corporate job offers and apply for PhD programs. By 2018, he was arriving at IIT Mandi, a campus built into the very mountains he had put a picture of on his wall years earlier. One moment of genuine belief from a respected authority completely rewrote the trajectory of a marginalized student's life. At IIT Mandi, Vinit zeroed in on a massive logistical problem. How do you teach advanced experiential science to children living in remote villages with zero budget and no lab equipment? This diagram demonstrates his breakthrough. Graphite conducts electricity, and ordinary paper acts as a substrate. Drawing a heavy line lays down a conductive pathway. Vinit proved a functional electronic sensor or capacitive touch panel can literally be drawn into existence. He packs a rucksack with pencils, paper, and salt water, buys a bike, and rides deep into the remote Himalayan valleys to bring this method directly to isolated schools. He bypassed the institutional barriers of wealth and expensive lab equipment entirely. He simply expanded the definition of a laboratory to include the basic supplies already sitting in every child's school bag. But walking into those rural classrooms triggered an immediate shock. In 25 years, absolutely nothing had shifted. Teachers were still employing fear, scolding, and rote memorization to manage the kids. Vinit took that internal frustration and turned it into a different kind of lesson. He asked 110 teachers to put down their books, close their eyes, and rub their hands together, making them physically feel electrostatic charge separation through the direct heat of kinetic friction. In 2025, the story reached its climax. H.C. Verma officially visited Vinit's lab at IIT Mandi. Before stepping up to the podium to inspect the paper circuits, the legendary physicist quietly removed his shoes in a gesture of deep reverence. Verma watched Vinit demonstrate the paper sensors and noted that this was more than a classroom exercise. It was actual research happening in a tinkering lab. The promise of the 2017 email had finally taken physical form. Today, whenever Vinit stands at the front of a fearless, laughing classroom, he is looking across time. He is teaching the children in front of him, but he is also finally becoming the exact teacher required to save the boy at the back bench.